The blood on her temple had dried to a dark rust color by the time Quinn Rourke spotted her crumpled form half submerged in the creek. One arm twisted beneath her body, and her skirts tangled around her legs like seaweed. He had been riding fence lines on his property outside Angel's Camp, California, checking for breaks after the spring floods of 1878 had wreaked havoc on the valley, when his horse had suddenly balked and refused to cross the shallow water. Quinn had cursed under his breath, thinking it was another rattlesnake, but then he saw her, pale as death itself, her dark hair fanned out in the current like ink spilling across parchment. He was off his horse before conscious thought caught up with his body, splashing into the cold water and dropping to his knees beside her. His hands shook as he pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse, and relief flooded through him when he felt the faint but steady rhythm beneath her clammy skin. She was alive, but barely, and from the looks of the wound on her head and the unnatural angle of her left wrist, she had taken a serious fall. Quinn scanned the area quickly, his eyes tracking up the steep embankment where loose stones and torn vegetation suggested she had tumbled down from the road above. "Can you hear me?" he asked, knowing she would not answer but needing to say something to break the terrible silence. Her eyelids did not even flutter. She was young, he realized, probably not more than 22 or 23, with delicate features that would have been pretty if they were not so deathly pale and slack. Her dress, though muddy and torn now, had once been of good quality, a deep green calico that suggested she was not some drifter or desperate soul but a woman of some means. Quinn made his decision in an instant. The town was 3 miles away, and Doc Patterson was often drunk by noon. His own ranch was less than a mile back the way he had come, and while he was no physician, he had patched up enough injuries on himself and his hands over the years to know the basics. More importantly, moving her that far into town risked making her injuries worse. He would take her home, tend to her as best he could, and if she did not improve quickly, he would ride for the doctor then. He lifted her as carefully as he could, cradling her against his chest and trying not to jostle her damaged wrist. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile in his arms, and something protective stirred in his chest as he carried her to his horse. Getting mounted with her unconscious weight was awkward, but he managed it, settling her across his lap and holding her secure with one arm while he gathered the reins with the other. The horse, a steady gray gelding named Smoke, seemed to sense the urgency and moved at a quick but smooth walk back toward the ranch. The ride felt endless. Quinn kept checking her face, watching for any sign of consciousness, but she remained limp and unresponsive. Her breathing was shallow but regular, and he took what comfort he could from that. He tried to piece together what might have happened to her. A riding accident seemed most likely, though he had not seen a horse anywhere near the creek. Perhaps it had bolted after throwing her. Or maybe she had been in a wagon that had gone off the road. But where were her companions? Why was she alone out here? The questions chased themselves around his mind as the ranch house finally came into view. It was a modest structure, built of timber and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and one side. Quinn had built most of it himself after buying the property 5 years ago, and while it was not fancy, it was solid and comfortable. He called out as he approached, and his ranch hand, an older Mexican man named Santos, came hurrying from the barn. "Dios mío," Santos breathed when he saw the woman. "What happened?" "Found her in the creek," Quinn said tersely. "Help me get her inside." Together they managed to get her into the house and laid out on Quinn's own bed, the only proper bedroom in the place. Santos lit lamps while Quinn carefully examined her injuries. The head wound looked worse than it probably was, he hoped, though head injuries were unpredictable. The gash was not deep, but the bruising around it was already turning spectacular shades of purple and yellow. Her wrist was definitely broken, swollen and discolored. He felt along her ribs carefully and thought he detected at least one crack there as well. Her legs seemed intact, though her ankles were bruised. "I will ride for the doctor," Santos offered, but Quinn shook his head. "Not yet. Let me get her cleaned up and see if she wakes. If she is not better by morning, we will send for him then." He did not add that he was reluctant to have Doc Patterson anywhere near her in his current state, or that having an unconscious woman in his home would cause enough gossip without adding an immediate house call to fuel the fire. Santos nodded, understanding written on his weathered face. "I will bring water and cloths. You will need to set that wrist." Over the next hour, Quinn worked with steady concentration. He cleaned the wound on her head, relieved to see it was indeed superficial despite the blood. He bound her ribs carefully, trying not to think too much about the impropriety of unlacing her dress and chemise, focusing only on the medical necessity. The wrist was the worst of it. He had set bones before, on himself and on animals, but never on anyone so delicate. He said a silent prayer and pulled, feeling the bones shift back into alignment. Even unconscious, she moaned softly, and the sound cut through him like a knife. He splinted it quickly with thin boards and strips of cloth, making sure it was immobile. When he was finally done, he pulled a quilt over her and stood back, exhausted. She looked small and vulnerable in his big bed, her face still too pale against his pillow. Santos had brought food, but Quinn could not eat. Instead, he pulled a chair up beside the bed and settled in to watch. The first night was the longest of Quinn's life. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, checking to make sure she was still breathing. Twice he pressed his hand to her forehead, worried about fever, but her temperature seemed normal. Dawn came gray and cold through the window, and she had not stirred once. He rose stiffly and went to make coffee, his body aching from the uncomfortable chair, but he was back within minutes, unable to leave her alone for long. Santos checked in periodically, bringing food that Quinn mostly ignored and offering to take a watch, but Quinn refused. He felt responsible for her somehow, as though finding her had created an obligation he could not shirk. He talked to her sometimes, his voice low and rough from disuse, telling her she was safe now, that she needed to wake up. She never responded. The second day passed much like the first. Quinn wiped her face with cool water and managed to get a little liquid between her lips, though most of it dribbled down her chin. He changed the dressing on her head wound, pleased to see it was not infected. Her color seemed marginally better, or perhaps he was just hoping it was. Night fell again, and he resumed his vigil in the chair, his eyes gritty with exhaustion. On the third morning, Quinn was half asleep when he heard a soft sound that brought him instantly alert. A moan, quiet but distinct. His eyes flew to her face and he saw her eyelids flutter. He leaned forward, his heart suddenly pounding. "Can you hear me?" he asked quietly, not wanting to startle her. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. They were a striking shade of gray-blue, like winter sky reflected in water. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, then her gaze found his face. He saw panic flash through her expression, and she tried to sit up, gasping in pain as the movement pulled at her injured ribs. "Easy," Quinn said, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "Easy now, you are hurt. You need to stay still." "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. "Where am I? My ranch outside Angel's Camp. I found you by the creek 3 days ago. You were unconscious. Do you remember what happened?" She stared at him, and he could see her trying to think through the fog of pain and confusion. The wagon. Something spooked the horses. They bolted and... She closed her eyes, her face crumpling. God, they bolted. I tried to hold them, but the wheel hit something and I... Her good hand came up to her head, touching the bandage there gingerly. I fell. The wagon went off the road, Quinn said gently. You tumbled down the embankment into the creek. I did not find any horses or a wagon. They must have kept going. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. My Aunt Clara was with me. We were traveling to Angel's Camp. She was. Her eyes widened with horror. Oh God, is she? Did you find her? Quinn felt his stomach sink. There was no one else, just you, but I did not search far. I was focused on getting you here and tended to. He stood quickly. I will ride out now and look. What does she look like? She is older, maybe 55. Gray hair. She was wearing a brown traveling dress. The woman's voice was desperate now. Please, you have to find her. I will, Santos. Quinn called, and his ranch hand appeared almost immediately. Stay with her. I am going back to where I found her to search the area. He was saddling smoke when Santos came out of the house. The lady, what is her name? Quinn realized he had not asked. He had been so focused on her injuries that basic introductions had not occurred to him. He went back inside to find her trying unsuccessfully to sit up, tears of frustration and pain streaming down her face. Stop, he said firmly, but not unkindly. You have cracked ribs and a broken wrist. You will only hurt yourself worse. My aunt, she sobbed. I have to find her. I will find her, I promise, but I need to know your name and anything else that might help me. She took a shuddering breath, clearly trying to compose herself. Nora Ramsey. My aunt is Clara Whitfield. We were coming from Sacramento. We had hired a driver, but he abandoned us 2 days ago after we paid him, took the money and disappeared in the night. We were trying to make it to Angel's Camp on our own. She laughed bitterly through her tears. Clearly, we were not very successful. I will find her, Quinn said again. I am Quinn Rourke. You are safe here, Miss Ramsey. Santos will stay with you. He rode hard back to the creek, his mind racing. 3 days. If the aunt had been injured and left out in the elements for 3 days, the chances of finding her alive were slim. But he had to try. For Nora's sake, he had to try. He found the wagon about half a mile up the road from where he had discovered Nora. It was on its side in a ditch, one wheel completely shattered. The horses were gone, probably run off or stolen by some opportunistic passerby. Quinn's heart sank as he approached, dreading what he might find. Clara Whitfield was lying 20 feet from the wagon, half hidden in the tall grass. She was on her back, her eyes closed, and for a moment Quinn thought she was dead. But when he knelt beside her and touched her shoulder, her eyes opened. They were clouded with pain and fever, but they opened. Help, she whispered. Please help. Relief and urgency flooded through Quinn in equal measure. I have got you. Your niece is safe at my ranch. I am going to get you there too. Clara's injuries were different from Nora's, but no less serious. Her leg was clearly broken, bent at an angle that made Quinn's stomach turn. She had a deep gash on her arm that was already showing signs of infection, red and swollen and hot to the touch. She was burning with fever, and Quinn knew she was in bad shape. He would have to get her to town, to the doctor, and hope that Patterson was sober enough to be of some use. Getting her onto his horse was agonizing for both of them. She cried out despite clearly trying to be brave, and Quinn murmured apologies as he settled her as carefully as he could. But instead of heading back to the ranch, he turned smoke toward town. Nora would be worried, but she was stable and being looked after. Clara needed professional help immediately. The ride to Angel's Camp took 45 minutes that felt like hours. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, and Quinn talked to her steadily, trying to keep her awake. When they finally reached the doctor's office, He was relieved to find Patterson relatively clear-eyed and coherent. Between the two of them, they got Clara inside and onto the examination table. "How long has she been out there?" Patterson asked as he cut away the sleeve around her infected arm. "3 days, near as I can figure." Patterson swore under his breath. "This is bad. The leg I can set, but this infection." He shook his head. "I will do what I can, but you should prepare yourself and her family. Her niece is at my ranch. She was injured too, but not as badly." Patterson gave him a sharp look. "You have been busy. There is going to be talk, you know. Unmarried woman at your place for 3 days. "I found her half dead in a creek," Quinn said flatly. "I was not exactly thinking about propriety. I was thinking about keeping her alive." I know. "I am just warning you, this is a small town." Patterson turned back to Clara. "Go on back to the niece. Tell her I am doing everything I can. I will keep the aunt here for now. She is too fragile to move again." Quinn nodded and headed back to the ranch, exhaustion pulling at him. He had not slept properly in 3 days, had barely eaten, and the emotional toll of the morning search was catching up with him. But when he walked into his house and saw Nora's anxious face turned toward him, her eyes desperate with hope and fear, his tiredness fell away. "I found her," he said quickly. "She is alive. I took her straight to the doctor in town." Nora's face crumpled with relief, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank God, is she? How bad is it?" Quinn pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down, choosing his words carefully. "Her leg is broken, and she has an infection from a wound on her arm. The doctor is doing everything he can. She was conscious when I found her, and she knew who I was when I told her you were safe. That is a good sign." "I need to see her," Nora said, already trying to push herself up again despite the obvious pain it caused. "You cannot. Not yet. You can barely move and the ride would be agony for you." Quinn reached out and gently pressed her shoulder, easing her back down. "Give yourself a few days to heal. Your aunt is in good hands, and as soon as you are strong enough I will take you to her." Nora looked like she wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. Even the small amount of movement had left her pale and shaking. She closed her eyes and nodded reluctantly. "You will go check on her, please. I need to know she is all right. I will ride in every day and bring you news, I promise." And he did. Over the following days, Quinn established a routine. He would tend to Nora in the morning, helping her eat and drink, changing the dressing on her head wound, checking her splinted wrist. Then he would ride into town to check on Clara and bring news back to Nora. Santos helped where he could, but most of the care fell to Quinn, and he found he did not mind. There was something peaceful about sitting with Nora, watching her slowly regain her strength, listening to her talk. She told him about her life in Sacramento, about her parents who had died of cholera 2 years ago, leaving her alone except for Aunt Clara. She talked about how they had been coming to Angel's Camp because Clara had inherited a small house from a cousin, and they had hoped to start fresh in a new place. She had a soft voice that grew stronger each day, and a quiet resilience that Quinn found himself admiring. In return, he told her about his ranch, about coming to California from Missouri after the war, about building this life with his own hands. He talked about the challenges of ranching, the satisfaction of watching his herd grow, the beauty of the valley in spring when everything was green and new. They were careful conversations at first, the polite exchanges of strangers thrown together by circumstance, but gradually they deepened into something more genuine. By the end of the first week, Nora was able to sit up without too much pain, though her wrist was still immobilized and her ribs ached. Quinn helped her to a chair by the window so she could look out at the ranch, and the smile that lit her face when she saw the mountains in the distance made something warm bloom in his chest. The news from town was mixed. Clara's fever had broken, which was good, but her leg was badly set and would take months to heal properly. Patterson thought she would walk again, but probably with a limp. The infection was responding to treatment, but slowly. She was weak and needed constant care, so she was staying in the small room Patterson kept at his office for patients who needed close monitoring. "She keeps asking about you," Quinn told Nora that evening as he brought her dinner. Santos had made stew, thick with beef and vegetables, and Quinn was pleased to see Nora eat with actual appetite for the first time. "She wants to know that you are being properly looked after." Nora smiled slightly. "She is a worrier, always has been. When my parents died, she dropped everything to come take care of me, even though it meant leaving her own life behind. She is the only family I have left. She seems like a strong woman. Patterson says she is a stubborn patient, which he means as a compliment. That sounds like her." Nora paused, her expression growing serious. "I do not know how to thank you, Quinn, for everything you have done. Finding me, caring for me, finding Aunt Clara. We would both be dead if not for you." Quinn felt his face grow warm. He was not accustomed to gratitude, not like this. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Nora said firmly. "They would not have. Most men would have taken me to town and left me with the doctor, would have thought their duty done. You brought me here, stayed with me for days, tended my injuries yourself. Santos told me you barely left my side for 3 days while I was unconscious." She looked at him directly, her gray-blue eyes steady. Why? It was a fair question, and Quinn found he did not have a simple answer. "I do not know," he admitted. "When I found you, I felt responsible. Like I needed to make sure you were all right. It probably does not make much sense." "It makes perfect sense to me," Nora said softly. "I think maybe you are a better man than you give yourself credit for." The words stayed with Quinn long after Nora had fallen asleep. He had moved out to the main room to give her privacy, making his bed on the floor near the fireplace, but sleep eluded him. He stared at the ceiling and thought about the past week, about how his quiet, solitary life had been turned upside down by one chance discovery. About how he found himself looking forward to his time with Nora, to their conversations, to the way her face lit up when he brought her good news about her aunt. It was dangerous, he told himself. She was a stranger, someone who would move on once she was healed. She had a life to build with her aunt in Angel's Camp, and he had his ranch. There was no reason their paths should continue to cross once she was well enough to leave. But even as he thought it, he knew he was lying to himself. Something had already started between them, something fragile and new but undeniably real. 2 weeks after he had found her, Nora was strong enough to make the trip into town. Quinn hitched up his wagon and made a bed of blankets in the back so she could lie down for the journey. The road was rough, but she bore it without complaint, her eyes bright with anticipation at finally getting to see her aunt. Clara was sitting up in bed when they arrived, and the reunion between aunt and niece brought tears to Quinn's eyes that he quickly blinked away. The two women held each other carefully, mindful of their injuries, crying and laughing in equal measure. Quinn stepped out to give them privacy, standing on the porch and staring down the dusty main street of Angel's Camp. When he went back inside an hour later, both women had composed themselves. Clara looked at him with shrewd, assessing eyes, and Quinn had the distinct feeling he was being measured and evaluated. "So you are the man who saved my niece," she said. Her voice was stronger than he had expected given her ordeal. "Nora tells me you have been taking excellent care of her." "I did what anyone would do, madam." "Stop saying that," Nora interjected with a hint of exasperation. "You are not anyone. You are someone who went above and beyond, and we both know it." Clara smiled slightly. "She is right. And I understand you have been making daily trips to check on me as well, bringing Nora news. That is more kindness than we had any right to expect from a stranger." She paused, then asked bluntly, "What is your intention toward my niece, Mr. Rourke, Aunt Clara?" Nora's face flushed bright red. "It is a fair question," Clara said calmly. "You have been living in his house, unchaperoned, for 2 weeks. Like it or not, there will be talk. I need to know if that talk will damage her reputation or if there is an understanding between you." Quinn felt his own face heat. "There has been nothing improper, madam. I have treated your niece with complete respect. As for my intentions—" He looked at Nora, whose eyes were wide with mortification but also something else. "Hope, maybe. I would like to continue seeing Miss Ramsay with your permission. To call on her properly once you are both settled, if she is amenable to that." The silence that followed felt endless. Then Nora smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "I would like that very much." Clara studied them both for another long moment, then nodded. "Very well. But there will be no more staying under your roof without proper supervision. Understood? At least not until there is a ring involved. We may have no money and no position right now, but we have our dignity and Nora's good name." "Understood, madam. And about that house you inherited. When you are ready to move in, I would be happy to help get it ready. Repairs, cleaning, whatever needs doing." Clara's expression softened. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Rourke, very kind indeed." The house Clara had inherited was small but solidly built, just on the edge of town with a view of the hills. It had been empty for several months and needed work, but nothing that could not be fixed with time and effort. Over the following weeks, Quinn spent every spare moment there, replacing broken windows, patching the roof, fixing the sagging porch steps. Nora came when she was able, her wrist still splinted but her mobility returning. She cleaned and scrubbed, made curtains from fabric she bought at the general store, and slowly transformed the neglected building into a home. They talked while they worked, learning each other in the easy way of people laboring side by side toward a common goal. Quinn discovered that Nora loved to read, that she had a talent for gardening, that she laughed at the most unexpected moments. Nora learned that Quinn was quieter than he seemed at first, that he noticed small details others missed, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her giggle like a girl. Clara watched them with knowing eyes from her chair, where she sat with her leg propped up and directed operations like a general commanding troops. She saw what was growing between them and did not try to discourage it. Quinn was a good man, honest and hardworking, and more importantly, he looked at Nora like she was the most precious thing in the world. That was worth more than money or status, as far as Clara was concerned. A month after the accident, Clara was able to move into the house with the help of crutches. The small building was cozy and clean, filled with the few possessions they had managed to salvage from the wagon and supplemented by donations from charitable townspeople. It was not much, but it was theirs, and that meant everything. Nora found work at the general store, helping Mrs. Chen, who ran it with her husband. The pay was modest but steady, and it gave Nora something to do while Clara continued to recover. Quinn continued to call regularly, always proper and respectful, but his visits grew longer and more frequent. He would stay for dinner, helping with dishes afterward and lingering on the porch with Nora until the stars came out. It was on one such evening, with summer settling warm and golden over the valley, that Quinn finally gathered his courage. They were sitting on the porch steps, shoulders not quite touching but close enough that he could feel her warmth, and the cicadas were singing their evening song. "Nora," he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She turned to look at him, her expression open and expectant. "Yes. I know we have not known each other very long, just 2 months, really. And I know you are still getting settled here, still getting your life in order. But He took a deep breath and made himself continue. I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. When I wake up, my first thought is of you. When I am working, I find myself thinking about things I want to tell you, things I want to show you. You have become essential to me. In a way I did not think was possible. Nora's eyes had gone very wide, but she did not speak, just waited for him to continue. I am not a wealthy man, Quinn went on. I have my ranch and it does well enough, but I cannot offer you luxury or an easy life. What I can offer is loyalty and devotion and a promise that I will spend every day trying to make you happy. If you will have me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. Nora Ramsey, will you marry me? For a moment she just stared at the ring, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. Then she laughed, a joyful sound that made Quinn's heart soar. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent, and Nora kissed him back with a sweetness that made the world fall away. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Clara's voice drifted through the open window. About time. I was beginning to think I would have to lock you two in a room together. They both laughed, and Quinn called back. Permission to marry your niece, madam. Granted with my blessing. Now stop canoodling on my porch and come inside for cake. This calls for a celebration. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Angel's Camp. It was a simple ceremony, attended by Clara, Santos, Doc Patterson, the Chens from the general store, and a handful of other townspeople who had befriended the newcomers. Nora wore a dress of soft blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and she carried wildflowers that Quinn had picked that morning. He wore his best suit, brushed and pressed within an inch of its life, and when he saw her walking down the aisle toward him, he thought his heart might burst from his chest. The preacher kept it short and simple, and when he pronounced them man and wife, Quinn kissed Nora like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. Because, he realized, he had been. Everything that had come before, all the years of solitude and hard work, had been leading him to that creek 2 months ago, to finding her and bringing her into his life. The reception was held at the ranch, with Santos cooking enough food to feed an army and Clara presiding over everything from a comfortable chair Quinn had set up for her in the shade. People danced in the yard to the music of a fiddle and guitar, and Nora and Quinn were pulled into the celebration, spinning and laughing until they were dizzy. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Quinn pulled Nora away from the crowd. They walked hand in hand up the hill behind the house to a spot he had discovered years ago, a rocky outcropping that overlooked the entire valley. The last light was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the world felt vast and full of possibility. Happy? Quinn asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Nora leaned back against him with a contented sigh. More than I knew it was possible to be. When I think about where I was just a few months ago, hurt and scared and unconscious in that creek, and where I am now. She turned in his arms to face him. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You saved me right back, Quinn said softly. I did not even realize how lonely I was until you came into my life. You made me remember what it feels like to care about someone, to want to build something beyond just survival. They stood there as the stars began to appear, holding each other and watching the day fade into night. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges, the daily realities of building a life together, but in that moment, everything was perfect. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Nora had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and the physical labor, the way weather and season dictated the work. Quinn had to learn to share his space, to think of someone else's needs and wants, to communicate instead of just existing in solitary silence. But they were both willing students, patient with each other's mistakes and generous with forgiveness. Clara's house in town became a regular destination for Sunday dinners, and Quinn grew to genuinely enjoy his aunt by marriage. She was sharp-witted and funny, never afraid to speak her mind but always kind underneath it. Her leg healed slowly but steadily, and by autumn she was walking without the crutches, though she did favor that side and probably always would. The ranch prospered under Quinn's steady management and Nora's organizational skills. She took over the bookkeeping and proved to have a knack for numbers, catching inefficiencies that had been costing them money. She also started a kitchen garden that produced more vegetables than they could possibly eat, so she began selling the surplus in town. The extra income was modest but welcome. Santos became like family, a protective older brother to Nora and a trusted friend to Quinn. He taught Nora to ride properly, laughing at her initial nervousness around the horses and praising her when she finally managed a full gallop across the meadow. He was there for every milestone, every triumph and setback, a quiet, steady presence that neither of them took for granted. Winter came cold and hard that year, with snow falling thick in the mountains and frost coating the valley in white every morning. Quinn and Nora would huddle close to the fireplace in the evenings, Quinn reading aloud from whatever book Nora had borrowed from the small town library while she worked on mending or knitting. They were simple moments, domestic and peaceful, but they were the moments Quinn treasured most. It was in early spring, when the wildflowers were just beginning to push through the thawing ground, that Nora told him she was pregnant. They were in the barn, checking on a mare that was due to foal any day, when she just blurted it out. "I am going to have a baby." Quinn froze, the brush he had been using on the mare's flank stopping mid-stroke. He turned to stare at her, certain he had misheard. "What? A baby?" Nora's face was glowing with joy and nervousness in equal measure. "I am carrying your child. Doc Patterson confirmed it yesterday when I went into town." The brush fell from Quinn's hand, forgotten. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and told him to be careful. He set her down gently, as if she were made of glass, his hands going to her still flat stomach. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Nora asked, though she could clearly see the answer on his face. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He kissed her then, tender and deep, pouring all his emotion into it. When they broke apart, he was grinning like a fool. "We need to tell Clara and Santos, and we need to. I do not even know what we need to do, make plans. Get ready, build a cradle, I should build a cradle." Nora laughed at his sudden stream of consciousness. "We have time. The baby will not be here until October. We have months to prepare." But Quinn was already making plans in his head, already thinking about everything that needed to be done. They would need to expand the house, add a proper nursery. He would need to make sure there was enough money saved to hire extra help during the busiest season, so Nora would not have to work so hard. He would need to make everything safe, child-proof every corner of the ranch. The months that followed were busy and joyful. Clara came to stay with them as Nora's pregnancy progressed, her practical presence a comfort to both Quinn and Nora. Santos built the cradle that Quinn designed, laughing at his friend's exacting standards and perfectionist tendencies. Nora sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her face soft with contentment as she worked. The baby came on a crisp October evening, just as the sun was setting. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Quinn thought he might go mad from helplessness, pacing the main room while Clara and Mrs. Chen attended to Nora. But finally, gloriously, he heard the thin wail of a newborn, and Clara emerged with a tired smile. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, strong boy, and Nora is fine, exhausted but fine." Quinn pushed past her into the bedroom, his eyes finding Nora immediately. She was pale and sweaty, her hair plastered to her forehead, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling, and when Quinn approached, she smiled at him. "Meet your son," she said softly. Quinn reached out with trembling hands and took the baby, holding him with infinite care. The infant was impossibly small, impossibly perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on this strange new world. As Quinn watched, the baby's hand wrapped around his finger, the grip surprisingly strong, and something in Quinn's chest that he had not even known was closed suddenly opened wide. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father. And I promise you, I am going to do everything in my power to keep you safe and happy." "What should we name him?" Nora asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one, always saying they would know when they met the baby. Quinn looked at his son, at this tiny person who was half him and half Nora, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. About the creek where he had found Nora, about the water that had been both nearly fatal and ultimately life-giving. "Thomas," he said, "after my father." "Thomas James Rourke." Nora smiled. "It is perfect." Thomas proved to be an easy baby, sleeping well and feeding eagerly. He had his mother's eyes, that striking gray-blue, and what looked like it would be his father's strong build. Quinn was besotted from the start, spending every spare moment with his son, talking to him in a low murmur while Nora laughed at his nonsense words and silly faces. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic but infinitely richer. Clara stayed on for a few months to help, but eventually returned to her house in town, though she visited frequently and insisted they bring Thomas to see her every Sunday. Santos appointed himself unofficial uncle and could often be found holding the baby while he worked, the infant sleeping peacefully against his chest. The years passed in a blur of moments both ordinary and extraordinary. Thomas took his first steps on a sunny morning in June, lurching from Nora's arms to Quinn's with a determined expression that made them both laugh. He said his first word, "Papa," which made Quinn unreasonably proud until he learned to say "Mama" a week later, and Nora got her turn to gloat. He grew from infant to toddler to little boy, curious and adventurous and affectionate. When Thomas was 3, Nora became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was no easier, she approached it with confidence born of experience. Their daughter was born on a cold January morning, small and delicate with wisps of blonde hair that surprised them both. They named her Sarah, and she was as different from Thomas as night from day, quieter, more cautious, with a serious expression that made her look like a tiny scholar. The house had been expanded twice by then, with proper bedrooms for the children and a larger kitchen where Nora could cook and bake to her heart's content. The ranch had grown too, more land purchased, more cattle added to the herd. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were happy. Clara remained a constant presence in their lives, doting on her great niece and nephew and dispensing advice freely. Her limp had become permanent, but it did not slow her down much. She took up quilting and became quite skilled at it, making beautiful blankets for the children that would be treasured for years. Santos eventually married a widow from town, a kind woman named Maria who had 2 children of her own. They built a small house on the ranch property, and the families became intertwined, the children playing together and the adults sharing meals and celebrations. The ranch felt like a true community, a found family built on loyalty and love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Nora back to the spot by the creek where he had found her. It was summer, and the water was low and clear, burbling over smooth stones. They stood on the bank hand in hand, looking at the place that had changed both their lives. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had ridden a different fence line that day?" Nora asked. "All the time," Quinn admitted. "And it terrifies me, the idea that we might never have met, that you might have." He stopped, unable to finish the thought. "But you did find me," Nora said firmly, "and you brought me home and watched over me until I was well, and then you loved me and built this life with me. That is what matters." "I think I fell in love with you while you were unconscious," Quinn said quietly. "When I was sitting by your bed, not knowing if you would wake up, I just kept thinking that I needed you to. That the world would be wrong somehow if you were not in it. I did not understand it then, but I do now. You were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. We just had to find each other." Nora leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "I think I fell in love with you when I first opened my eyes and saw you there. You looked so worried, so scared that you had failed somehow. I knew right then that you were someone special, someone worth keeping." They stayed there for a long time, remembering and honoring the moment that had brought them together. Then they walked back to the ranch, to their children and their life, grateful beyond words for the chance encounter that had given them everything. More years passed, bringing joys and sorrows in equal measure. Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep when Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 7, and the family mourned her deeply. But they celebrated her life too, remembering her wit and wisdom, and the way she had given them her blessing when it mattered most. Santos and Maria's family continued to grow, adding 2 more children to their brood. The ranch grew with them, becoming one of the most successful operations in the valley. Quinn took on more hands, but Santos remained his right hand, the friend who had been there from the beginning. Thomas grew tall and strong, taking after his father in build and temperament. He loved the ranch work and proved to have a natural talent with horses. Sarah was quieter but no less capable, with her mother's mind for numbers and organization. Together they were a force to be reckoned with, and Quinn often said they would run the place better than he ever had once it was their turn. When Thomas was 17 and Sarah 14, Nora discovered she was pregnant again. It was a surprise, as they had assumed their family was complete, but not an unwelcome one. Quinn joked that he was too old to be chasing after another baby, but his excitement was evident. This time, they had another son, whom they named Matthew, and he became the beloved baby of the family, doted on by parents and siblings alike. As the children grew toward adulthood, Quinn and Nora found themselves with more time together again, cycling back to something like those early days when it had been just the two of them. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the valley, and talk about everything and nothing. About the children and their futures, about the ranch and what would come next, about the life they had built together. "You have any regrets?" Nora asked one evening. It was summer, and the air was warm and sweet with the scent of honeysuckle she had planted years ago. Quinn considered the question seriously. "Not a single one. There are things I might have done differently, decisions I might have made better, but I would not change the overall course of things. Not when it brought me here to you, to this life. Not even the early years when money was tight and the work was hard, especially not those years. Those were when we learned who we were, both individually and as a couple. When we built the foundation everything else rests on." He reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers like he had done 10,000 times before. Every moment, every struggle, every triumph has been worth it because I got to experience it with you. Nora smiled, the same smile that had captivated him 25 years ago. You always know exactly what to say. I have had a lot of practice, 25 years of trying to find the words to express how much you mean to me. I figure I should be getting good at it by now. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one. Inside the house, they could hear the murmur of voices as Thomas helped Sarah with something while Matthew played with the wooden horses Quinn had carved for him. It was a perfect moment, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Thomas eventually married a woman from a neighboring ranch, a spirited redhead named Alice who could ride as well as any man, and who made their son laugh in a way they had never heard before. The wedding was a huge affair, with half the county in attendance, and Quinn walked his son down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering his own wedding and how far they had all come. Sarah proved more independent, choosing to go to teachers' college in Sacramento rather than marry young. She came home for summers and holidays, full of stories about city life and the wider world, and while Quinn sometimes worried about her being so far away, he was immensely proud of her ambition and intelligence. Matthew, still young, was growing into his own person, with his mother's kindness and his father's steady determination. He talked about becoming a veterinarian, fascinated by animals and their care in a way that went beyond simple ranch work. Quinn and Nora encouraged him, knowing that each of their children needed to find their own path. As Quinn entered his 60s, he began to slow down, leaving more of the daily ranch operations to Thomas and the other hands. It was not easy for him, this gradual letting go, but Nora helped him through it, reminding him that he had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. They took to traveling a bit, something they had never had time for before. They went to San Francisco and marveled at the city's growth and modernity. They visited Sarah in Sacramento and attended her graduation from college, bursting with pride. They even took a trip back to Missouri, to the place Quinn had left as a young man, and he showed Nora where he had grown up, the roots he had left behind to find himself in California. But they always came back to the ranch, to the place that was truly home. To the house they had built and expanded over the years, to the land they had worked and loved, to the creek where it had all begun. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that seemed to include the entire county. There was food and music and dancing, and speech after speech about what Quinn and Nora meant to the community. Thomas gave a toast that left everyone in tears, talking about his parents' love and dedication not just to each other, but to everyone around them. Sarah read a poem she had written about finding home. Matthew, 14 now and growing into a fine young man, simply hugged them both and said thank you for being the best parents anyone could ask for. When the party finally wound down and they were alone again, Quinn and Nora walked out to their favorite spot, the rocky outcropping above the house. The moon was full, casting silver light across the valley, and the world felt peaceful and complete. 40 years, Nora said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me by the creek. Other times it feels like I have known you forever. Both are true, I think, Quinn said. Time is strange that way. The important moments stretch and compress, becoming both instant and eternal. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. I would live it all again, every single day, just to end up right here with you. Even the parts where I was being difficult, especially those parts, they kept things interesting. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. I love you, Nora Rourke. I have loved you since I carried you home from that creek, and I will love you until I take my last breath." "And I love you," Nora whispered. "My savior, my partner, my best friend. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for this life." They stood there under the moon, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting out of a chance encounter and a desperate situation. Around them, the ranch slept peacefully, generations of family safe and warm. The cattle settled in the fields, the horses drowsed in the barn, the creek burbled along its ancient course. It was a small corner of the world, but it was theirs, and it was perfect. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the natural progression of life. Thomas and Alice had children of their own, making Quinn and Nora grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. Sarah eventually married a fellow teacher and moved back to Angel's Camp, close enough to visit frequently. Matthew went off to veterinary school, making good on his childhood dream, and returned to open a practice in town that served the ranches and farms throughout the valley. Quinn's hair turned completely white, and he moved a bit slower, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Nora never wavered. They were constants in each other's lives, as essential as breathing. Every morning he woke grateful to find her beside him. Every night he fell asleep counting his blessings. Nora aged gracefully, her beauty transforming from the delicate prettiness of youth into something deeper and more enduring. The gray in her hair only made her eyes seem brighter, and the lines on her face were testament to decades of laughter and smiles. She remained active and engaged, teaching their grandchildren to read, tending her ever-expanding garden, quilting blankets like Clara had taught her all those years ago. On a spring morning much like the one when Quinn had first found Nora, they walked together down to the creek. They moved slowly now, hand in hand, but they still made the journey regularly, drawn back to the place where their story had begun. "I have been thinking," Nora said as they stood on the bank, watching the water flow past, "about how many times things could have gone differently, if the wagon had not gone off the road right there, if you had not been checking that particular fence line that day. If you had taken me straight to town instead of bringing me to the ranch, so many tiny decisions and chance moments that led to everything we have now. I know. I think about it too. It is humbling, realizing how fragile it all was, how easily we might have missed each other. But we did not." Nora squeezed his hand. "Whatever force in the universe brought us together, I am grateful to it. You gave me a reason to live when I had lost everything. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. You gave me all those things too," Quinn said. "I did not even realize how empty my life was until you filled it. You made me whole." They stood in silence for a moment, honoring the connection between them, the love that had sustained them through 4 decades of life together. Then Quinn turned to Nora, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "When I carried you home from this creek 43 years ago, I had no idea what I was beginning. I thought I was just helping someone in need. But I was really starting the greatest adventure of my life. You were unconscious, hurt, a stranger, and yet somehow you already had my heart. And you have kept it safe ever since." Tears sparkled in Nora's eyes. "I am so glad you found me, so glad you stayed, so glad for every moment we have had together." "As am I, my love, as am I." They kissed soft and sweet beside the creek where everything had begun. Around them, spring sang its eternal song of renewal and hope. Above them, the sky stretched blue and infinite. Before them lay the path back to the ranch, to their family, to the life they had built together through love and dedication, and an unwavering commitment to each other. When they finally turned to walk back, they moved as one, still hand in hand, still together after all these years. Behind them, The creek continued its endless flow, carrying water and memories downstream, bearing witness to the love story that had begun on its banks so many years before. It had nearly been a place of death, but instead it had become a place of beginning, the first chapter in a long and beautiful story. And that story, though its middle chapters had been full and rich, was drawing toward a close now in the most natural way. Quinn and Nora knew it, accepted it, and found peace in it. They had lived well and loved deeply. They had raised good children and built a lasting legacy. They had been partners in the truest sense, supporting and challenging and delighting in each other through all the seasons of their lives. On a quiet evening several years later, as they sat on their porch watching another sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson, Quinn turned to Nora with a contented smile. "You know what I realized today?" he asked. "What is that?" "I have loved you now for longer than I lived without you. My life before you seems like it belonged to a different person, someone I barely remember. Everything that matters, everything that makes me who I am, has happened with you by my side." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. "I feel the same way. When I try to remember my life before you, before the creek and the ranch and our family, it is like looking at an old photograph of a stranger. This is my real life. This has always been my real life. I just had to find my way to it." "I am glad you did," Quinn said softly. "I am glad the universe or fate or simple chance brought you to me. And I am glad I was stubborn enough to bring you home instead of leaving you with the doctor. Best decision I ever made." "The first of many good decisions," Nora agreed, "like proposing to me. Like building this ranch into what it is today. Like raising our children to be kind and strong. Like loving me every single day, even when I did not make it easy." "Especially then," Quinn said with a smile. "The hard days made the good days even better." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars they had watched together for more than 4 decades. Around them, the ranch settled into its evening rhythms. Lights glowed in Thomas and Alice's house across the property. Smoke rose from Santo's and Maria's chimney. In the distance, a coyote called, and the cattle lowed softly in response. It was peaceful and perfect, a moment of pure contentment. Quinn thought about all the moments like this they had shared, thousands upon thousands of them, each one precious. He thought about the children and grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward. He thought about the life they had built with their own hands and hearts. And he thought about that day by the creek, about seeing Nora unconscious and broken and not hesitating for even a second before deciding to save her. It had been instinct then, a simple human impulse to help someone in need, but it had become so much more. It had become the foundation of everything good in his life. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Nora asked. "For waking up, for staying, for loving me, for building this life with me, for everything." Nora lifted her head and kissed his cheek. "Thank you right back for finding me, for caring for me, for watching over me when I could not watch over myself, for being exactly the man I needed, exactly when I needed him." They remained on the porch until the stars were thick overhead, holding hands and sharing the kind of peace that only comes from a lifetime of love. Eventually, they made their way inside, banked the fire, and climbed into bed together as they had done tens of thousands of times before. As Quinn drifted toward sleep, Nora curled against his side. He sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the chance encounter that had brought them together, for the years they had been granted, for the love that had sustained and nurtured them, for every moment, every memory, every precious day. He had found her unconscious by the creek, carried her home, and watched over her for days. But really, she had saved him just as much as he had saved her. They had saved each other, and in doing so, had created something beautiful and enduring. That was the real story, Quinn thought as sleep claimed him. Not just that he had found her, but that they had found each other. And having found each other, they had never let go. Outside, the moon rose over the valley, casting its silver light over the ranch and all who sheltered there. The creek murmured its endless song. The wind whispered through the grass. And in the house, two people who had loved each other for a lifetime slept peacefully, safe and warm and together. It was not a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, and it was theirs, and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.